Morning. So I want to talk a little bit about system, I guess, in relationship to mechanics informing play. Um, so I've always been intrigued by, I mean, obviously this is tabletop gaming, right? It doesn't have to be any more than just guys sitting around, dropping dice, waging war, buying real estate, or role playing, a party of adventurers delving into the dungeon to rid the local area of the goblin problem and, take some treasure with you on the way out, right? So that's just gaming and it's great. And of course, I grew up, I mean, that was my first touchstone for what role playing was. I was, again, when I discovered Holmes in my brother's closet. Uh, Again, I was 8, maybe, way above my head. I really can't recall whether we even knew what we were looking at, so to speak. But it was Moldvay, 1981, where we began to actually make characters and we began to play. We began to do this thing, my friends and I, and that led to Top Secret, Star Frontiers, Boot Hill, you name it. We purchased, I purchased, I can't say we, but I ended up owning all those TSR games and we played them all. Star Frontiers, not as much. Uh, Boot Hill, a little more. Top Secret, I would say, was my second most uh, played game at the time. And then, of course, D&D is just it was the launching point, and it was great because we all had, again, a sense of I think we all felt we could quickly make up a character and just do this thing, and it was just something magical about it. Okay, but I was thinking about again, regardless of role playing, playing a character, so to speak, versus playing a avatar, playing a thing at the table that fights goblins with a sword and shield, or a thing at the table that casts sleep upon the village of goblins, or the thing at the table that heals a party member wounded at camp, or the thing at the table that picks the locks and hides in shadows. Right? These are just mechanical devices, and we can play a character that's we're invested in the idea of the personality, or we just play as a player making decisions, right? Um, very often bringing our own sense of strategy to the game, despite what your character may or may not know, right? The player's trying to win the game. The player's playing strategically to achieve a thing and using the mechanics available to them to do so, which is where I think many players who experience games with skills feel maybe a little more empowered. They feel a little more mechanically relevant to issues that could occur in the game versus D&D, where there are no skills. We make assumptions about, hey, I'm gonna light this torch. Hey, I'm gonna build a fire. Hey, I'm gonna hunt. Hey, I'm gonna swim across this river. There might be a challenge. Oh, you know what? Make a roll. This is a raging river, dude. You're gonna have to make a strength check to get across this river fully loaded. If not, you could suffer some drowning damage. Whatever the case may be, right? GM fiat, making up rules as we go, and the players aren't restricted by their imagination, right? However, you play a game like Savage Worlds that has swimming or athletics, right? Whatever, right? The players now are able to see structurally that they can do more than just swing a sword, or cast sleep, or right. Okay. But what this brings me to is, I very often liken this particular hobby to art, painting, writing, music, right? Art is derived from purpose, but purpose has to be defined. So mechanics define the purpose, and then the art comes from the adherence to those mechanisms, which create a result that, bounded by the rules, bounded by the mechanics, ultimately create amazing moments, if that makes sense, as opposed to cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians. We've all played those as kids, right? We used to run around with plastic machine guns and play army, right? I shot you, no, you shot me. And we've talked about this before in the community and certainly among friends. The idea of just what you say goes. Obviously, gaming, there are dice or cards um, that will remedy that particular. I shot you, no, you didn't. I shot you, right? Okay. So it's not at all the goal of tabletop gaming, right? We're not playing Monopoly where I announce on my turn I'm going to go 3 spaces and buy that. I have to roll the dice and I have to execute the die roll. Then I can make some decisions based on where I land there. Oh man, I got to pay. I got to pay to stay here. Oh man, I got to pay the tax. Oh man, I'm going to buy this real estate. I'm going to put a house on my real estate, whatever. So your turn is dictated by a random die roll. Your success is not so much dictated by random die roll, although the randomness of it keeps us always honest. So, it's like it's music, right? Jam sessions are always fun, but very often not tolerable to an audience, right? Jam sessions are fun for the creator, they're fun for the artist, they're fun to just groove and find some sound or some vein, but they're not intended necessarily as audience pleasing musical art, right? Um, Writing, right? There are rules to writing, right? Now, whether we're going to write traditional English or we're going to write in Russian or Korean or whatever, right? There's obviously rules, grammatical rules, there's actual language rules, but the reality is flow of consciousness writing may be good to work out all the nonsense that's bottled up in your head or that you need to get out, but it's not going to make good reading, right? It's not going to make, right, great art, right? We're not reading Hemingway's notes. We're reading his work. We're reading his work that adheres to grammar and adheres to rhetoric and adheres to a style of intent. And what comes out of that in a 120-page book, Old Man in the Sea, 100 and whatever it is, 25 page, I can't remember how, out of that simple little story um, uh, lights up our imagination, but doesn't restrict exactly what we may or may not imagine from that, right? And then, of course, same with art, right? I can just slap paint on a blank canvas and call it art. People do. Um, uh, if there are rules to art, horizon lines, vanishing points, chiaroscuro, value scales, right? Whether we're doing realistic art or we're doing abstract art or stylized art, there are rules. We all recognize when something makes sense, may not like it, may not be our cup of tea, but we can also recognize quality. Generally, quality is an unknown. It's very difficult to quantify quality, but we all know it. Somehow we all know it, right? But the point is, even if it's amateurish art, but they at least follow all the rules, we can say they try. They were within the bounds of the things we accept as art. Now they're at the student level. They need to really get better. They need to work on certain things, whatever the case may be. The point is they're at least abiding by the rules. And then the mastery, to become the artist, the mastery is when you can do all these things, abide by the rules, yet subtly maybe break the rules, right? So you kind of earn the right to play a solo, lead guitar solo in the rock band, or you earn the right to break a few rules, maybe in art, once you aesthetically know what it is you're trying to convey, so to speak, or you're inventing it. Citizen Kane, Orson Welles came from theater. Orson Welles, much of Orson Welles' films were staged like theater scenes, but there were things that he did in cinema that no one had ever done before, and he had to invent the ways of shooting angles to create the psychological effect on the scene that he wanted to do. That wasn't just a stage play, right? uh, uh, great film doesn't rely solely on staging, right? However, great film can stage a scene, but also shoot from certain angles, et cetera, to convey an emotion or a point our eye towards something, etc. And we may or may not be aware of film and how film works, but we recognize whether we know why we liked it or why it moved us, or whether we missed a minor point. Um, you come away going, there was something about that was better than that thing I watched 2 days ago. And something as simple as I'm a big fan of Columbo. Love the Columbo show, all of them. Huge fan of Columbo. And Steven Spielberg directed the third episode of the very first year of a Columbo. Or 30, I think it was the third episode of the first season Spielberg directed. And when you see television in the 70s, which I love TV of the 70s, film of the 70s. But when you see Steven Spielberg's Columbo, he's using tools and he's shooting at angles, he's shooting close-ups, he's doing things that no one else in television dare do. And of course that meant probably cost more. It was probably higher production, which meant we're going to shoot close-ups of typing and close-ups of faces, and you're gonna stage faces close up, and it just made that Columbo episode feel film like. The quality of a TV show went up 2 notches with a young Spielberg directing that show. So he breaks some of the TV rules by conveying, in a way, cost more, I'm sure, to shoot, but also conveyed a higher level of expertise just for something as simple as a television show, right? By using film ideas, which was fantastic. If any of you have seen that, but it's I can't remember the name of the episode, but anyway, so I think gaming is similar, right? I mean, if you sit down to play poker with 6 people, you know the etiquette. Hopefully, you know the etiquette of poker. Hopefully, you certainly know the rules. You understand, or you're going to be successful based on luck of the draw, but also successful based on whether you can recognize the odds that somebody else at the table has a better hand than you, or that somebody's holding something that you need, or and then there's of course the bluff, right? But there is a certain adherence to the mechanics of poker, of course, and then what comes out of a night of poker. Ironically, 52 cards or whatever it is, 50 cards, depending on which game you're playing, right? From that comes, again, play to find out, right? Out of that comes a result you can't predict, despite playing a very rigid game with only so many outcomes, right? Although it may be astronomical odds in some things. But so when we talk about role playing, for instance, and adding mechanics or adding system, there's a couple of things that occur in gaming, in the communication of gaming. One, the referee or the GM generally directs or narrates what's happening, gives the sights, the 6 senses or 5 senses: sight, smell, hearing, maybe tasting, right, feeling, and maybe a 6th sense, very often represented in a role, right? The 6th sense comes up in a vigilance check in some room. It comes up in a wisdom check in old D&D. It comes up in a passive perception check in D&D 5e, right? It comes up in a notice check in Savage Worlds. These are really, in many ways, a subconscious kind of 6th sense check when a GM calls upon a role that players can't possibly know is required. And then, of course, the players, hopefully within the bounds of the scene and the bounds of the context of what's happening, they're going to either think about their options and call those up. I want to see if I can identify these fingerprints from the crime scene, and I'll use my microscope, and I'm going to go back to my lab. I'm going to use my microscope. I'm going to pull these fingerprints up, and I'm going to attempt to compare them to the known villains that are operating in Chicago. And GM says, okay, you're using a tool. It's a pretty large database. It's going to take time. You're going to have to get 3 successful notice checks in. If you fail 3 checks before you get to 5, you won't be able to find in time the fingerprints. But if you can get 5 successful notice rolls before you fail 3, then it's a good chance you're going to be able to, have some success in either identifying that you know who these fingerprints belong to, or that they do not exist in the database. Right? So let's do this, right? And they start rolling dice, making notice checks, getting a modifier for the microscope, right? Okay, and the number of rolls that it takes to succeed maybe dictates the number of hours that the character's been sitting at the table, right? Get 5 right before you fail 3. Might still take us, 7 rolls. We could say that's 7 hours of work, and voila, sure enough, there he is. John Barnes, aka Jacob Bartholomew, right? Right. So we, but what makes that more rewarding, than say a simple die check? I'm going to go back to my lab, use my lab, and I'm going to try to find these fingerprints in the crime database. And the GM says quite simply, let's go ahead and make that roll. It's going to be in a cunning check, drops the dice, but voila. Yes, his name is John Barnes, aka Jacob Bartholomew. You found him, and it took you 5 hours to do it. It's still the exact same concept. Is one more rewarding than the other? And this is where I guess I very often would argue mechanics are mechanics. As long as we need to achieve something that's not given to us, especially if it's a challenge. That could also be adjudicated very simply. How long do you want to, are you going to look through every fingerprint in this database? And Joe says, yeah, I'll take the time. And then the GM can narrate the fact that he exists in the database. You will find him. So it's just a matter of deciding, well, it took you 12 hours, but you found him. No roll required because he was in there, right? There was no chance he wasn't in there. It was just, could he find it, and how long would it take him to find that information, right? The player says, no, I'm going to go through every fingerprint. Wow. Okay, it's going to take you 12 hours, but you find it. You got it. No roll necessary, right? Is that also a mechanic? I think it is. Stating how you're going to go about doing something. And if we know that there is a criminal, he would have fingerprints, he's in the database, then the mechanism here is time. How much time are we going to find it? Or maybe he misreads the fingerprints. He's tired, eyes are shot, and he fails to see it, right? So we might need to make that roll. 8 hours in, Joe, it looks like you've gone through all the fingerprints. You didn't find him. Yet he was in there, but he either missed it or he misread it, right? He didn't get the comparison correct. He was tired and fatigued. But I don't, the question I suppose is, at what layer of mechanics provide the definitions and the boundaries that make one experience better than another, or make one experience more rewarding than the other? I often don't want to limit players' imagination with mechanics, or I don't want to limit their ability to imagine how they're using their sword. So, and very rarely do games do that, I think. However, something like 4th edition, you might have 3 at-will melee attacks with your sword, and they're choosing a particular one, insights for everybody, a particular vision that we all share. It becomes a consistent shared narrative. I'm doing my heavy hammer smite, which comes down, and if I hit successfully, it does damage plus knocks him back 5 feet. We're all bound by the rules. We can all narratively see he hammers him with this giant hammer, and the goblin is knocked back 5 feet if he survives. And the GM adheres to those limitations. The player adheres to those limitations. And is that more rewarding? Because we all know that's true. It's absolutely true. You hit him and you knocked him back 5 because you used that particular attack. So your narration is still within the bounds. How are you going to narrate that? What's that look like? The GM's going to narrate. The player's going to narrate it. Right? Okay. So I think, so what, again, for instance, our game is a simple play your character, and when things come up, either the player will call up a attribute that they would like to utilize, or the GM will say, you're gonna have to make a luck check here, and they drop the dice, simple die roll, and we go from there. The GM gives him more information, or the player knows he's succeeded and he achieves what it is he wanted to achieve, and we just keep rolling with the punches. Very low footprint, right? Not a lot of issues there. Does that make it more rewarding? Does it make it more immersive? Does it make you feel more like your character? As opposed to the Ubiquity Hollow Earth Expedition pilot slash gunslinger, and you need to make a pilot check, and you actually have piloting, and you have a high rate of piloting, and the GM says this is going to be a pretty moderate challenge. You're going to need 6, and the player, or what are you going to need 4, whatever. The player looks and says, I take, I pull back on the yoke and I stabilize the plane. I'm taking the average. And everybody knows that you're in command of that airplane despite the challenge. Is that more rewarding? Or is it more rewarding to say, well, I got 9 dice, so here we go, drop the dice, and we find out, right? I'm not certain if it matters. It informs play. I mean, it does. I mean, system matters, mechanics matter. It informs play. It informs the GM. It informs the player how far they can go. It informs the player as to how valuable their pilot is, their piloting skill is. One of my issues when I first came back to gaming and sat down to play my cleric in 4th edition D&D, and I came to the table anticipating my cleric had a particular role, and his role was to heal, and his role was to turn undead. And I think it was somebody in the party who was a ranger or something, and they used healing. And I thought, wait a minute, I thought I was the guy who could do that. All of a sudden, my cleric was less relevant. Why am I playing the cleric when anybody can heal? Anybody can use a healing surge, right? And it opened up the game for everybody. It meant the party didn't need a cleric, right? But it also, I thought, minimized the value of the team in many ways. But in many other ways, it created a greater strategic value for different classes, right? Now the cleric is blessing the fighter, giving him a +2 to hit, as opposed to needing him for healing, right? So there was different layers of strategy now, and I get it. It's not about my ability to heal; it's about my ability to do these other things, and therefore, does that give me greater command in a conflict, or does it give me greater reward for executing properly the strategy of this part right here, right now? 5th edition games, the tough decisions when a character was down and they were making death saves, and my character would have to decide: do I leave the combat to go over and stabilize, Carl's character? And those moments became fraught, with danger, because if he fails that death save, but if I pull away to go treat Carl, I may save Carl, but I won't be able to drop that 2d6 lightning bolt upon the monster this turn, kind of thing. And it created a wonderful experience, especially when you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how it's all going to go out. So I'm not certain. I think it is, of course, preferences are preferences. Rules are rules. Mechanics support the rules generally, and in that sense, should inform everybody at the table as to how we're going to do this thing and what's going on. I'm not certain. Again, definitions define purpose. Purpose ultimately defines the art. The art comes from those limitations. The experience, the wow moments come from those limitations that we're all bound by happening organically. I very rarely feel like the mechanics have to be deeper than an attribute check when it comes to a challenge. When a player uses his own want to investigate the fingerprints, and because he's a police officer, we're going to make some assumptions he's got those skills, versus the cop who has a 10% in fingerprint, right? But Joe in the party is the fingerprint specialist with an 80%, right? So Bill can still have the same body. Hey Joe, why don't we go back to the lab and you check out these fingerprints, man? You are the expert on fingerprints. So they work together that way. Bill can still have the idea if Joe's not thinking that way, and Joe just has the expertise. So the great thing about skills is, again, they also allow us to play a character that can do things we can't do, or the character can make up for the things we don't know, or the things we're not good at, or the things we can't think up. So that requires the GM to be capable of knowing everybody's skills, because the player isn't thinking about fingerprints. The GM's going to have to, does the GM clue them in? You could always use fingerprints here, Joe. You're pretty good with this. I mean, that I would like to think the players would make that decision. That's where it gets tricky. But at the same time, the GM, right, should know everybody's proficiencies, which is, again, more work for the GM in a more complicated game. Or the GM doesn't care. Joe says, we're going to check out these fingerprints. And the GM just says, okay, who's making this check? And of course, the first guy is going to look and say, well, I got an 80 in fingerprints. Okay, let's make that check, right? So system matters, mechanics impact play, but it's they're at certain levels. And I'm not certain what's more rewarding. There have been times, for instance, back when I was making music or organized noise. I was making organized noise with my best friend, my oldest friend. We grew up. I was writing lyrics and poetry. He was the musician, right? I would make some drum tracks or come up with a bass line, but I couldn't read or write music. I certainly can't sing a lick. And there was a point, in my 2021 where I realized there is nowhere for me to go if I don't understand the rules of music. I'm not doing anything on purpose. I'm doing it all on accident. So I could liken this gaming. Mechanics help us avoid accidental play. Lack of mechanics create happy accidents, or in many ways, complete flukes, right? So I could argue that my experience doing music from 16 to 22, by the time I was 22, I realized without any musical education, without having any sense of reading and writing music, and I'm even as a lyricist, even as somebody who's just writing poetry, etc., I felt totally and utterly it was way over my head, way over my head. And that became that turning point. Do I want to make this a career? If I do, I must get this education. I must understand music at every level if I'm going to go to the places I would like to go as an artist. I wasn't willing to do that. It wasn't something I wanted as bad as I thought I did at 16, 17, 18, whatever. But by 22, I knew there are no fundamentals here. I have no fundamentals to achieve art in music. I could achieve an artistic result by accident, but where's the reward in that? So do mechanics provide reward because we take advantage of them and it's less accidental? I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting thing. But I do believe the definitions, which you can see as systems or mechanics, define our purpose. And then from that, those restrictions and purpose can come a rewarding result, whether it's art or it's just the actual result that arises from proper play. The more we define, the more we restrict. The more I define what music is, the more I restrict. But then the more I'm liberated when I actually understand why I'm putting these notes together, why I'm doing the 3/4 time, right? It becomes a purposeful thing as opposed to an accidental thing. Why are we investigating this crime scene? Who is doing what? And out of those mechanics come a purpose to our madness, and the results, because we used purpose, we used defined purposeful things, right, lead to player, I won't say player agency, but some sense of player satisfaction, maybe. Very hard to say. I really enjoy character play. I enjoy simple, rules light, minimalistic mechanics, because they still provide us with the resolution of a challenge. And I don't necessarily want everything that I do defined. If I'm playing a investigation game, I think you probably need to have investigative skills, because not every player is going to be, not every character is going to be very good at those things, right? Again, Mike Hop's a marksman. He can shoot really well. Joe's police officer happens to be a great driver. Bill happens to be great with fingerprints, right? The more we define and restrict, the more we see those personalities come out, right? But as opposed to broad strokes. Again, hard to say. Just toying with the ideas of defining restrictions, purpose, and results. Hard to say whether a single die roll to resolve that challenge is as rewarding. I mean, for me it is, but I get why skills, and I get why mechanics, when they restrict combat in Pathfinder, where it maps minis, there are rules, and then that guy pulls off the perfect move like chess. Then he makes the D20 critical hit. Then he rolls that fat damage and he drops the Wraith before the whole party and everybody cheers. Was that more rewarding than the Theater of the Mind, make a die roll, rolled a 20, rolled 6 hit points, dropped the Wraith, and we still cheer the fact that we survived the Wraith? Is it more rewarding to tactically waste the Wraith, because we had these mechanical chess match type things where we restricted, it's defined, and then everything I do has a purpose to an ends. Therefore, out of that, although it seems restricted, comes an organic result that appears to be purposeful, right? Purpose driven, so to speak. This is what makes, I think, the hobby so fascinating, right? Because you can have joy in all these things. At what level do you want those restrictions? Of course, growing up with D&D, the restrictions were pretty simple. You got armor class, and the better your armor class, the more likely you are to avoid being killed. The higher your hit points, the longer you might last if you are hit. And of course, rolling that D20 as a higher level against their OC. But for the most part, it was all decision making. It was player driven decision making. I'm going to tie myself to the tree and try to jump this pit, which again, the player is attempting to avert the fall to his death. And sure enough, he fails the check to jump across the pit. The rope saves him, but he didn't get across the pit, right? The player is actively making strategic decisions versus the mechanics directing, I guess, your choices, right? Anyway, thanks for listening. Everybody have a great weekend.